Okay, so you want to own the World Bank. Good news. It has $424 billion in total assets on its balance sheet. It has lent money to virtually every developing nation on Earth. It has been operational since 1944, making it one of the oldest and most continuously relevant financial institutions in the history of modern economics. It employs over 12,000 people across 130 country offices. Its bonds carry the highest possible credit rating from every major ratings agency simultaneously, which is a distinction shared by almost no other entity on the planet. Governments line up to borrow from it. Other institutions model themselves on it. The financial architecture of the post-war world was built around it. It sounds like the most powerful financial institution you could possibly control. You cannot own it. It is structurally impossible for any private entity to acquire it. No individual can, no corporation can. No sovereign wealth fund, no private equity firm, no consortium of the wealthiest people in human history pooling their resources into a single vehicle can acquire a controlling stake in the World Bank. It is not structured for private ownership. It was never intended to be. The 189 member countries that constitute its shareholder base did not create it to generate a return on capital. They created it to do something that private capital structurally cannot do on its own, which is absorb risk in places where the risk is too large, too long-term, and too politically complicated for any investor answerable to a quarterly earnings cycle to touch. But understanding why you cannot own it and what it would actually mean to try tells you more about how global financial power actually works than almost any other institution you could study. By the end of this video, you will understand why the World Bank, the institution that has deployed over $1 trillion in financing across 150 countries, that has shaped the economic policy of entire continents, that can borrow money at rates no private entity can match and deploy it into places no private entity will go, operates through a model of power that looks nothing like ownership and functions nothing like profit, and why the countries that control it have spent 80 years making sure that the line between influence and accountability runs exactly where they want it to run. Let's start with what it actually costs to get in. Membership in the World Bank Group is not purchased, it is applied for. A country seeking membership first joins the International Monetary Fund, which is the institutional prerequisite. Once an IMF member, it can apply to join the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the IBRD, which is the original and largest component of what most people call the World Bank. Membership involves subscribing to a share of the IBRD's capital stock. The subscription amount is determined by a formula based on the country's economic size, its GDP, its share of global trade, and a set of variables that the existing membership negotiates periodically in what are called capital increase rounds. The United States currently holds approximately 15.5% of IBRD voting shares. Japan holds around 7%. China holds approximately 5%. Germany, France, and the United Kingdom each hold between 3 and 4%. The remaining 183 member countries divide the rest, with the smallest economies holding fractions of a percent that give them a voice in institutional governance that is mathematically present and practically limited. The United States' share of paid-in capital, the actual money the U.S. government has deposited into the institution, is approximately $3.2 billion across the World Bank Group entities. The total subscribed capital, which includes callable capital that member governments have committed to provide if needed, is dramatically larger. The callable capital is the mechanism that gives the World Bank its extraordinary credit rating. It is not money that has been paid. It is a guarantee from 189 governments, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, and Germany, that they will provide funds if the institution ever faces a situation where its ability to service its debts is at risk. The markets know those governments will not default, therefore the World Bank does not default, therefore it borrows at rates that approach or match the most creditworthy sovereign borrowers in the world. This is the core mechanism. The World Bank does not hold $424 billion in assets because 189 governments made deposits. It holds that position because the creditworthiness of those governments is backstopping its ability to raise money in international capital markets at rates that no private institution can access. It then lends that money to developing countries at rates they cannot access on their own. And the spread between its borrowing cost and its lending rate covers its operating expenses and capitalization requirements. The model works because the guarantee is credible. The guarantee is credible because the countries that matter most to capital markets, the United States, the European Union members, Japan, have never withdrawn from the institution or reneged on a callable capital commitment in 80 years. Now let's talk about what the World Bank is actually doing. The institution does not make loans the way a commercial bank makes loans. A commercial bank prices risk and charges accordingly. A borrower with high default risk either pays a high interest rate or does not receive a loan at all. This is how private capital markets work and why they do not, on their own, finance 30-year infrastructure projects in low-income countries at affordable rates. The World Bank lends to middle-income countries through the IBRD at rates that carry a small spread over its own borrowing cost, typically 1 to 2 percentage points, on terms of 15 to 30 years, with grace periods that commercial lenders do not offer. It lends to the poorest countries through the International Development Association, the IDA, at zero or near zero interest rates, with repayment periods of up to 40 years and grace periods of 5 to 10 years before repayment begins. The IDA is not funded through bond markets the way the IBRD is. It is funded through replenishments, periodic rounds of contributions from donor countries that agree to put in money every 3 years to keep the window operational. The most recent IDA replenishment, IDA 21, was negotiated in 2024 and targeted $100 billion in financing capacity. The contributions from donor governments make up the core of that figure, leveraged through borrowing and IBRD transfers to achieve the total. This means the IDA is structurally dependent on the political willingness of wealthy governments to keep funding it. When a major donor government changes its foreign aid posture, when it reduces its contribution, delays its payment, or attaches conditions to its participation, the financing available to the world's poorest countries shrinks. The borrowing countries have no mechanism to compel the donors to maintain contributions. The donors have the mechanism to shape what the IDA does with its money, because money with conditions attached is still money, and countries that need it accept the conditions. This is the fundamental architecture of World Bank power. It is not ownership in the commercial sense. It is something more durable and more consequential. It is the ability to determine the terms on which sovereign governments access development capital, and through those terms, to shape the economic policies those governments adopt. Now let's talk about what is inside the governance structure. The World Bank is governed by a board of governors on which each member country has one representative, typically the finance minister or the central bank governor. The Board of Governors meets once a year at the annual meetings, which are held jointly with the IMF. Between annual meetings, governance authority is delegated to the Board of Executive Directors, which has 25 seats. The United States, Japan, China, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom each hold a dedicated seat. The remaining 19 seats are held by constituencies, groups of countries that elect a representative to speak for them collectively. The United States is the only country with enough voting shares to exercise a formal veto over changes to the institution's charter, which require an 85% supermajority. At 15.5% of votes, the U.S. can block any amendment to the Articles of Agreement unilaterally. No other single country has this power. China, at 5%, cannot. The European Union members combined can, but the EU does not vote as a bloc. The United States can. This veto has never been used in a formal parliamentary sense because it has never needed to be. The knowledge that it exists shapes every negotiation that happens inside the institution before it reaches a vote. The position of the United States on any major policy question, on the conditions attached to loans, on the sectors the institution will finance, on the criteria for eligibility, on the appointment of the institution's president, is not simply one input among many. It is the gravitational center around which every other input orbits. The president of the World Bank has been an American citizen appointed by the United States government since the institution's founding in 1944. This is not a written rule. The Articles of Agreement do not specify that the president must be American. It is a convention maintained for 80 consecutive years through 15 presidencies, including several moments when other member countries publicly questioned it and then accepted the American nominee. The managing director of the IMF by parallel convention has always been a European. These two conventions together represent an informal governance compact negotiated at the institutional founding in 1944, when the United States and the European powers were the only entities with the economic weight to fund the system. The compact has persisted because the economic weight, while redistributed significantly, has not redistributed enough to break it. China's 5% voting share is a number that does not reflect its current position as the world's second largest economy. The voting shares at the World Bank are updated periodically in capital increase negotiations, and China's share has increased from approximately 2.8% in 2010. But the pace of adjustment lags the pace of economic change, and the countries that would need to give up shares to accommodate a larger Chinese allocation are the same countries that negotiate the terms of the adjustment. This tension is not academic. It is the defining governance challenge of the institution in its current period. China is simultaneously the World Bank's third largest borrower historically, a significant donor to IDA, a growing voice in institutional governance, and the primary sponsor of competing multilateral lending institutions, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the New Development Bank, that were created in part because China concluded that the pace of adjustment inside existing institutions was insufficient. The competition between these institutional frameworks is not military, it is financial. It is about which institutions' loans come with whose conditions, whose contractors build the infrastructure, and whose economic model gets embedded in the policy frameworks that borrowing governments adopt. Now let's talk about the longest-term problem, because it is the one that the institution's own strategy documents acknowledge with careful language. The World Bank was created to solve a problem that defined 1944. The reconstruction of war-damaged economies and the development of newly independent nations that had no access to private capital markets. The first loan the institution made was to France in 1947 for reconstruction after the Second World War. France repaid it. The second loan was to the Netherlands, then to Denmark and Luxembourg. The institution's original borrowers are now among its largest shareholders and donors. The problem it was created to solve in Western Europe was solved. The institution shifted its focus to the developing world, which was the right institutional adaptation and the basis for its relevance over the subsequent 7 decades. The problem it faces now is different in kind. Climate change requires financing for energy transition in middle-income countries at a scale that dwarfs the institution's current lending capacity. The gap between what the World Bank can lend and what the energy transition in developing economies requires has been estimated by the institution's own economists at multiple trillions of dollars over the next decade. The World Bank's annual lending commitments run to $70 to $100 billion across all its entities. The financing need is measured in trillions. Meeting that need requires either a capital increase, which requires member governments to commit more money, which requires legislative approval in the United States, Europe, Japan, and elsewhere, which is a political process that operates on a timeline determined by domestic politics rather than by the urgency of the climate problem, or a reform of the institution's balance sheet management to allow more lending against existing capital, which requires the ratings agencies to concur that the additional leverage does not impair the AAA rating, which is the foundation on which everything else depends. The institution is aware of this. The Evolution Roadmap, adopted in 2023 under President Ajay Banga, explicitly addresses the need to scale the institution's financial capacity to meet the challenges of climate and development simultaneously. The roadmap involves hybrid capital instruments, portfolio guarantee mechanisms, and private capital mobilization strategies designed to multiply the impact of each dollar of public funding. Whether this works depends on whether private capital will follow the World Bank into the transactions where the World Bank is already present, because private capital will not go there on its own. There are 189 member countries of the World Bank. There have been 189 since South Sudan joined in 2012. The institution has been continuously operational since its first Board of Governors meeting in Savannah, Georgia, in March 1946. It has survived the collapse of the Bretton Woods monetary system, the debt crises of the 1980s, the Asian financial crisis, the global financial crisis, and a global pandemic. Its AAA rating has never been downgraded, its bonds have never defaulted. But the institution operating today is being asked to solve problems of a scale and complexity that the men who designed it in 1944 at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, did not anticipate, with a governance structure that reflects the power distribution of that year rather than this one. Financed through a model of callable capital guarantees whose political durability depends on the continued willingness of democratic governments to honor commitments made by their predecessors. The lending keeps the lights on in the borrowing countries. The governance structure keeps the lawyers and the diplomats permanently occupied. And the gap between what the institution can do and what the world needs it to do is either the argument for the most ambitious reform in its 80-year history, or the reason something else eventually replaces it.